Welcome to Biology Made Easy. In this lesson, we are discussing transport of water in plants. Welcome. We start by looking at points that we would use in this lesson. So points outline. We will use this term, hydrostatic pressure, water potential, tension. These are forces that pull water up the plant from the soil to the leaves. So what is hydrostatic pressure? Simply is pressure exerted by fluid at equilibrium at any one point due to the force of gravity. Well, if I have this fluid in here, the pressure of the fluid at this point A, that is the hydrostatic pressure, will be less than the pressure here. So we want to take notes. That is some of the things we are going to talk about. Then water potential is the tendency of water molecules to move from one place to another. It's not necessarily tendency of water to move from one cell to another. Water potential, we can have tendency of water moving as water vapor into the air. So that is water potential, tendency of water to move from one place to another. Can be from the soil solution into roots, right? Then we'll also meet the term tension. And tension is a pulling force. It's negative pressure. For instance, if we have water being lost in the form of water vapor, and water has to move from other cells into the cells that lost the water, water will be pulled from the xylem, and so there will be tension set up to pull more water from the system. And so tension is also used when we talk about water transport. Now, what are the other terms we will meet? Mass flow is another term, which is how water moves in xylem vessels. The water moves in bulk. That is mass flow. Bulk transport of materials from one point to another due to pressure differences. So if the pressure is low at the top here and the pressure is high, water with all the substances dissolving it will be moved in bulk, and that is mass flow. Another point that we'll talk about is the cohesion forces of water, adhesion forces of water between water and the xylem vessel walls, and also capillarity. These are ways in which water is kept as a continuous mass in the vessels. We'll discuss that. We'll also discuss root pressure, which is a force built in the xylem of the root that enables water to move up, little though it is, but as an important force. Then we will discuss apoplast and symplast pathways through the cortical cells and the epidermal cells. And in this part, we'll also talk about the endodermis. Right. So let us now move to look at transport in water in plants as a topic. Now, as we said, water is pulled up the plants by these forces. We can talk about water potential. We can talk about hydrostatic pressure. We can also talk about tension. Now, we want to note that the water potential at the surface of the leaf, between the leaf mesophyll air spaces and outside the leaf, there's a water potential gradient there. The water potential is lower outside than in the intercellular spaces. And so water moves from regions of higher water potential to regions of low water potential. So Water will be drawn from areas of low water potential, and you see the water potential increases as you go down because the water is moving up. And there will be highest water potential in the roots. We can also look at hydrostatic pressure, which is the mass of water, the pressure of it at any one point. And you see the hydrostatic pressure at the surface of the water in the veins will be smaller than the hydrostatic pressure buildup of water as you move down. So the hydrostatic pressure is lower here, it goes higher, and is highest in the roots. Tension as water vapor leaves the leaves, more water is drawn from the xylem, and as water is drawn from the xylem, a high tension is set up to pull the water. So tension is high at the surface. As you go down, the tension becomes higher. The tension is highest down. These are the forces that move water up the plant. So we come to look here. Water is pulled up the plant down a water potential gradient from the roots up the plant. One can also talk about hydrostatic pressure and say that water moves from the regions of low hydrostatic pressure in the leaves. Water moves from the high hydrostatic pressure in the roots, and the water is pulled up because of the pressure differences. Then we can also say that the water is moved up the plant from the soil water through the roots up because tension pulls the water. So these are ways by which to describe how water moves up by water potential, hydrostatic pressure, or tension. You meet all these terms when you talk about transport of water in the plants. Now, when water has moved in, the water is drawn up by mass flow in the xylem vessels. So we talked about mass flow as water moving in bulk in a continuous stream in the xylem vessels. Now, the forces that keep the water in a continuous flow as mass are the cohesion forces between water molecules. Water molecules are polar and they are attracted to each other and bonded together by hydrogen forces. And that is what builds the cohesive forces of water that keeps water as a mass that flows. Then there's also adhesion forces. There's water molecules stick to the surfaces of the xylem vessels, and these strong forces also keep the water together in mass. And then also capillarity. Because the xylem vessels are very tiny, they can be as tiny as 0.01 millimeter in diameter, so they are very thin vessels. So capillarity of water, that is water flowing in very thin vessels, also allow the water to be able to move in bulk, that is mass flow. So as the water has been drawn because of the forces we mentioned, hydrostatic pressure, tension, water potential, the water is drawn from the soil water, and the water has to move through the cortical cells and moves by mass flow. Well, beside water potential, hydrostatic pressure, and tension, root pressure also assists in pulling the water up from the roots. Now, root pressure is the force that builds up in the xylem of the root because the endodermis, here is the endodermis, actively pushes salts into the pericycle and the xylem. Because the endodermis actively pushes salts and ions into the xylem becomes more salty. That is, the osmotic potential of the xylem increases and the water potential of the xylem in the root decreases. So more water rushes from the cortical cells into the xylem of the root. And that is what builds the root pressure, which also assists in pushing water a little up the xylem of the stem. And root pressure can push water only about 3 meters. So root pressure is just a small force, but it also assists in pushing water from the xylem of the roots. Now, as we have talked about the fact that these forces, we mentioned hydrostatic, water potential, tension, pushing water from soil water up the plant. Now, the water, when it is pulled, goes through the root hairs, epidermis, and the cortex. And we have to explain that the water moves through these epidermal and cortical cells by the apoplast, symplast, and vacuolar pathways. So how the water moves in the cortex is by these. Apoplast through the cell walls, from cell wall to cell wall to cell wall, through the root hairs, epidermal cells, cortical cells. Apoplast, symplast, and vacuolar. That we have here, apoplast, symplast, vacuolar pathways. But want to note that when the water gets to the endodermis, the water does not pass through the apoplast pathways, is restricted. The water is moved only through the symplast and also vacuolar, which is a little pathway. So endodermis, because of the Casparian strip, you see, will not allow water to go through the apoplast pathway. And we want to explain this by showing the endodermal cells, as we talked about in our earlier lessons in plant tissues. This is the endodermis. These are suberin, waxy substances that forms a strip. That's the Casparian strip. And once the Casparian strip is there, water cannot move through the cell walls. So water will have to move through only through the cytoplasm and the plasmodesmata, and that is the symplast pathway. So here are the Casparian strip. These, when the Casparian strip in very old cells, the whole cells will have suberin, and so it will only leave passage cells that water can pass through the symplast pathway through the endodermis. So this is how water moves in plants, transport of water, as we have explained. And we have put together all that we have discussed in notes for you. As we have said, water is pulled from the soil into the leaves down a water potential gradient, or because of pressure differences, hydrostatic pressure, low here, high up here, and also tension. And the water moves in mass through the xylem vessels, that is mass flow, and the water moves through the 3 pathways in the epidermal and cortical cells, but it only moves through the symplast in endodermal cells because of the Casparian strip. And root pressure also builds up because of the work of the endodermis, and that is transport of water in plants. And you have these notes that you can check and have a good notes that you can check and be able to describe the process well by yourself. I hope I have been able to make things clearer to you. And if you like the lesson, please give us your thumb and also subscribe. So we meet in our next lesson. Thank you and goodbye.